People are attracted to authenticity, but it's hard to define for me. Here's my best attempt. True alignment of what you think, what you say, and what you do. The hardest part is realizing that our thoughts are fucked and that we have to fix them instead of faking the next two.
Wholeheartedly agree.
You said it.
Man. Yeah, that's dead on.
Well, I've got a really cool idea. Herostratic fame. Many people would rather be hated than unknown. In ancient Greece, Herostratus burned down the temple of Artemis purely so that he would be remembered. Nowadays, we have nuisance influencers who stream themselves committing crimes and harassing people purely for clout. Herostratic fame.
Yeah, that's like you gain the world, but you lose your soul. Kind of. I mean, I'm also the last person to judge. And so like, if that's what you want, then by all means do it.
I don't think it's what people want. I think that they think it's what they want. I've been playing with this idea or this name, one of the concepts that the book will be focused on, intentionalism.
Mm-hmm.
And Essentialism by Greg McKeown is one of my favorite ever books. And I figured it would be a nice like hat nod. Doing what you mean to do and wanting what you want to want is so fucking hard to do and so rare because we're built to conform.
I think one of my life goals, and I can summarize it in a question, but is to be fearless. And it's, I mean, equal opposite, courage is another word. But I love this question, which is, what would you do if you weren't afraid? And I love thinking about that when I'm thinking about big life decisions. Like, what would I do if I weren't afraid? And it's usually like the big one, the bigger thing that I really want to do, but I'm afraid to do it. It's like, that's what I should do. And to your point about, you had the 5 things that you told your team. The one that we have is, originally it was something that we called 1 of 1, which is make only things that we can make. Like, you'll never see a Coca-Cola business breakdown from Alex Ramosi because anyone can do a Coca-Cola business breakdown. That's not 1 of 1 content. But if I say, I doubled the sales of this company by implementing these 4 things, no one else can say that because no one else did it, right? And so it's 1 of 1. And so as the book launch and whatnot came, we took 1 of 1 and it became this big, massive thing. And it stopped being about like, what can only do things that only we can do. It was about doing things that we didn't even know we could do yet, which became 1 of 0. And that's why that became the brand that I'm going to continue to wear for the next few years, and build that association. But I think that kind of encapsulates my personal life goal, which is like, what would I do if I weren't afraid? And what would I do if I knew I couldn't fail? And the idea that I will never wish for fewer epic stories at the end of my life. And I've never regretted failures. I've always regretted things that I didn't try. And so just along those lines of trying to create more bias internally towards action rather than inaction, and normalizing consequences of failure as we said earlier, win or learn. And I think that little frame, believe it or not, for anyone who's like on the teetering edge of like, what should I do that thing? When I was debating quitting my job, which is still the hardest decision I've made to this day, still of the many that I've made, was I figured that if I didn't make the entrepreneurship thing work, I would have a hell of a story for business school. And that was actually like the reasoned argument that I gave myself for being willing to quit, was that I think that with my experience, I'll still be able to get a job and I'll have a really cool story of entrepreneurship that I could use to apply to get into business school and then eventually get a job later. And so most times we catastrophize any failure to death, right? Which is like, I'm going to fail, I'm gonna lose all my money, I'm gonna be homeless, no one's going to talk to me, and I'm going to die, right? But like, if you play it out 2 natural steps, like, okay, I lose everything. What do? I would probably have a couch or floor that someone would lend me, because at least socially, I haven't fucked everyone I know. And so I have that. It's like, okay, so I would have some capacity to do that. Okay, is there anything that I could do in the meantime in order to make money? Well, sure. I could drive Uber and strip. And I've already, I've told this story before, but for me, that was genuinely my plan B, because I knew that I could probably make 70, 80 grand a year driving Uber. I could probably make 150 stripping, maybe 200. Strip at the gay bars, the guys pay better. And then, boom, I've got 280,000 a year. I could live on the floor and then I could restart again. And so that's because I don't have a lot of shame with that kind of stuff. That's not like, that doesn't matter to me. But I think playing out the fear, Layla says this and I love it, but that fear is a mile wide and an inch deep. And so it looks like this ocean that you're going to step into and drown. But as soon as you step into it, you realize it was not that deep at all. And you can keep walking through it. And I just love that visual, because a lot of times when it's like we have this anxiety around this big decision we have to make, if you actually take the step and realize that it's not death, you're not going to drown immediately. There's plenty of other steps you can take from there, even if you get a little wet.
Did I tell you my story about a friend who went through a cancellation and was worried he was a coward?
Oh, like a public cancellation thing? Okay.
So I went for dinner quite a while ago now with this guy that I was pretty interested in, and he knew what I did, and we sort of bumped into each other and, what are you doing? Let's go for dinner. And I knew about the situation that he'd been through, but he didn't know that I knew. So I was like, tell me. Like, there's no pressure, and he was able to be unencumbered. And basically went through like a tough cancellation where kind of the whole world came down to bear on him. And he was telling me this story. I was in a very interesting time. I was like being very reflective. And he said, my whole life I'd been worried that I was a coward. I was terrified that I was a coward. But I'd never been through a situation where I'd had to bring absolutely everything to bear on my life. And I'm a hard man, and I like to hang around with hard men, and I like to shoot guns and do jiu-jitsu and be around Navy SEALs and stuff like that. But I always had this fear in the back of my mind that I might secretly be a coward. And then he said the cancellation thing happened, and it wasn't a very difficult 1-rep max. It wasn't a really hard CrossFit workout. It was something outside of his control. And he used this term that I love, and he said, I could always hear my better self clearing his throat in the room next door. And I always wondered what would happen if I had to really, really wrangle everything, if the whole world came crashing down on me. And I wanted to work out whether or not I was a coward. And he said, thankfully, he kicked the door in and came through. But I just love that I could always hear my better self clearing his throat in the room next door. But he'd never been fully tested. Done lots of hard things, a lot of acclaim, very successful, blah, blah, blah. But we all know, that's your thing, right? Like, but I'll know about whether or not you've left something on the table.
Mm-hmm.
And there was always just 5% still in the tank when he was doing things, about how he felt, about how invested he was. He always had a get out of jail free card in one way or another. And I love that. I could always hear my better self clearing his throat in the room next door.
2 things on that. So I think if we're consolidating some of the points we were making earlier, the "but I'll know" refrain, I think that a lot of the personal excellence comes down to making the "but I'll know" more important than the what will everyone else think? Because I think the true test of whether you're a quote perfectionist or not is if everyone else in the room says it's exceptional, and then you say, "But I'll know it's not because I don't think it's exceptional yet." If you still break what everyone else believes is beautiful so that you can make the thing that you make it the way you want it to make, or make it the way you want it to be, I think that is probably like the truest test of whether or not you really do value your own opinion over those of other people's. And if you really want to be true to quote the art, whatever your art is, art, I'm using it as a generic term. It could be the career or even like the financial projections that you're supposed to do at your company. Like, there is a way you could do it and do it absolutely fucking excellent. And there's a way you could do it that you could phone it in and probably not get in trouble. But the thing is that you'd know. And then you'd be the type of person who always phones it in. And that to me is disgusting. And that would make me disgusted with me. And that is the thing that would make me want to peel my skin off, because I would hate me. And I think that's why so many people do hate them, because they do settle and they do make these things and they do know and still ignore it. And so they ignore the man in the other room who's clearing his throat, and they shut the door and they lock it and they never let that guy in. And so they look like everyone else, they act like everyone else, and they get what everyone else gets.
America was built on the backs of men who smoked cigarettes, drove without seatbelts, and had bacon for breakfast. If you miss your biohacking routine this morning, you're going to be okay. There's a time for leverage but there's also a time for violence, which is just brute force. People get really obsessed with optimal, which is getting the most bang for your buck, but there's also maximizing, which is just getting the most bucks. You lose more life trying to optimize everything than just living it. The stress of trying to be perfect is killing you more quickly than your imperfections.
Mm. I think that's an ode to being willing to take huge amounts of imperfect action towards one goal and being willing to sacrifice other things for an extended period of time, despite the fact that other people will say they're making a sacrifice. Like when we enter seasons, I call it, the season of no, which is where I have an extended duration where I say no to almost everything. And most people say that's unbalanced. And they hurl that as though it's a bad thing. They're like, that's so unbalanced. And you're like, yes, that's the point. Because if I had a balanced outcome, then I won't have the outsized return on this one thing. And so again, like there's so many of these little insults that people will throw at you, like you're unbalanced, you changed, that they intend as insults. But if you actually don't take your society programmed response and say, oh, they mean to insult me. But if you actually think about what they're saying something that's true. And then we just need to be okay with that truth because that was the choice we made to begin with. And so I think about that a lot, which is like, how many things do people tell me that they intend to insult me with that I can take as a compliment?
Didn't someone bump into Layla walking down the street?
Yeah. It happened so recently. So yeah, we're walking in the street. Someone bumps into her. We don't always walk like side by side because there's lots of people. So we like split up sometimes. Anyway, she comes back to me and she was like, guess what this guy just said? And I was like, what? And she was like, he called me a skinny bitch. And I was like, what? But she seemed so happy. And I was like, I just kind of shook my head, like, tell me more, like explain. And she was like, I mean, he said I was skinny. And I was like, this is the perfect example of him hurling an insult and her choosing not to be insulted.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks.
No, but really.
Yeah. Do you really mean it? Yeah. I wonder how many times we've been insulted, even in my younger days where someone said something to me that like, if I had my current brain, I could have been like, you really mean it? Thanks, man. And, yeah, like so unbalanced. I remember I took that as such an insult for such a long period of time. Now, part of that was because when I was being brought up, balance was like one of the big frames of my household was like, you have to be balanced, which really just meant you have to be awesome at everything. But balance was the word. So being unbalanced was a term that was used as an insult. And so for so many years, I wanted to be balanced. But then I was like, well, nothing great was ever achieved by people who tried to be great at all things. And so I was like, okay, I'm just not gonna. I might not have a great relationship for a long period of time. I mean, there was like a lot of people don't know this, but in the early days of our relationship, even when we were married, I told Layla, so the first 3 years, I said the business comes before our marriage. So a lot of people don't know that. And I was like, well, to me, it made sense. It was like most people break up over money. The business makes money, so the business feeds us, and then we will be okay. And that was kind of my thinking around it. And we eventually flipped that and said, like, if we're good, the business will be fine. But it took 3 years to get there. But all that to say, like, I think having periods of imbalance, and maybe to be fair, if I hadn't had that priority at that time, maybe Gym Launch wouldn't have been what it became. And so I can't look back and say like, I should have done it different, because it's really easy to say that now. But like, I might not be here to say that if I had been that way.
Oliver Berkman's got this great frame where he talks about choose in advance what you're going to suck at.
Oh yeah.
It's in 4,000 weeks. And if you are a type A go-getter person who has what I call the curse of competence, your options in life are restricted more by what you choose than what you can do.
Mm-hmm.
You will feel disquiet when something that you used to be great at begins to slip because you've focused your attention elsewhere. You used to be in really great shape. You said that one of your goals this year was to get a raise, or to be able to buy your first house, or to find a partner, or to do whatever. Hey, guess what? If you're spending 4 or 5 nights a week going to places where you can maybe date, or going out on dates, or doing whatever, you're probably not going to have as much time to dedicate to the gym. Yeah. If you want to get that raise or be able to save for your first house or whatever, you're going to have to work later, which maybe means that your friends are going to drop off. If you pick whatever the thing is, there is a price that you begin to pay. And this cycle began for me so frequently toward the back end of my 20s, where I would dedicate myself to a thing, then something else would begin to slip. So I would then go, ooh, I'll just give a little bit. I'll just give a little bit to that. And it's not an additive system, it's multiplicative. It's not 2 plus 3, it's 2 times 3. And that means that the more that you attend to the thing that you say that you're going to do, the more the gains accrue to you. And then you can still pivot back, but you need to periodize things. And this is a frame that I wish, even now, it's still something that I struggle with, realizing that now isn't forever. The thing that you're doing right now doesn't need to be forever. Yeah. If you are coming out the back of the searching for the partner thing and you're like, hey, guess what? I gained 15 pounds. Yeah. So, all right, well, dedicate yourself for the next 6 months to going to the gym. But this isn't the rest of your life.
Right.
And once that thing's done, oh, well, guess what? I'm back to, 12% body fat. I feel great about myself. What's next? It's not forever.
Yeah. It's just for now.
Yes.
We have a frame that we actually use a lot. I always think about these things from a business context, but they end up retroactively, applying to life. But when we're making big strategic decisions, we say which problems would we prefer? And so rather than talking about the gains and what's the upside, if we have let's say we're going to make a big investment in software for this company, or we're going to make a big, a new service line, or we're going to just decide to develop a physical product, right? I mean, I know you were literally on the just back half of a big decision like this yourself. It's okay, let's imagine what the problems are going to be if we decide to do this new service category. Well, some people are going to complain that they're not getting results from this thing. We're going to have a ton, we might have some negative reviews in the short term that we're going to have to deal with. Let's look at what happens when one of our favorite customers tell us to fuck off. Let's really sit in what each of these problems is. And then when we spell out all of the problems and we don't even think about the upside, say, which of these problems do we prefer and which are we more equipped to deal with? Sometimes we have really amazing innovation and, in my opinion, really solid decision making that comes afterwards that minimizes kind of the post-decision regret, because we also know what negatives would have come with the path unchosen. Because most times our regrets come from the path unchosen because we imagine it only with the upside. We only think about, I think there's a book where a girl lives many different versions of her life. And
Midnight Library.
Yes. And the thing is that there's these pieces of her life that she imagines are going to be amazing, but then she realizes her best friend's dead, or all of a sudden she's pregnant. And you're like, whoa, what happened? And so we don't take into account on the paths not taken the things that we would have lost along the way. And so I think really good decision-making and also regret minimization is that when you make the decision, you think about the downsides too, and you remember what those downsides are. And for me, that has been one of my strongest frames for I didn't decide to do that. Were all that? Oh yeah, those were a lot. I'm glad those are problems I'm very happy I don't have to deal with now.